History is written by the victors. But what happens when the victor is erased by the very person he saved? What happens when the greatest general of an age, a man who reconquered half the world, is rewarded with exile and humiliation? This isn't a myth. This is the story of a ghost, the ghost of the last true Roman, a man who saved civilization and was thanked by having his name systematically torn from the pages of history. To understand his story, you have to understand his world. The year is 527 AD. The Western Roman Empire is a memory, a corpse picked clean by barbarian kings. All that remains is the East, a glittering bastion centered on the magnificent city of Constantinople. Here, a new emperor has just taken the throne, a man of low birth but boundless ambition. His name is Justinian, and he has a dream, a dangerous, impossible dream, to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory, to reclaim what was lost. But a dream like that isn't won with words. It's paid for in blood. And Justinian needed a sword. He found his sword in a young Thracian officer named Flavius Belisarius. We don't know much about his early life, which is telling. He wasn't a nobleman born to power. He rose through the ranks on sheer talent. He was brilliant, daring, and, most importantly, fiercely loyal. Justinian saw this and made Belisarius his personal bodyguard, then a general. His first real test would come not from the shattered West, but from the eternal enemy in the East, the Persian Sasanian Empire. It was a trial by fire. The Persian frontier was a graveyard for Roman ambitions. For centuries, the two superpowers had bled each other dry in the deserts of Mesopotamia. The Persians had the finest heavy cavalry in the world, the legendary cataphracts who could shatter Roman infantry lines like glass. When Justinian sent Belisarius to the front, no one expected a miracle. He was given a small army, outnumbered and outmatched. The goal was simple: hold the line, don't die. But Belisarius didn't believe in holding lines. He believed in winning. At the fortress of Dara in 530 AD, Belisarius faced a Persian army twice his size. A conventional battle would be suicide. His infantry would be crushed. So he did something unconventional, something that bordered on genius. He ordered his men to dig a series of deep, bizarrely shaped trenches in front of their lines. Not for defense in the traditional sense. These were traps. They were designed to funnel the unstoppable Persian cavalry into killing zones, breaking their charge and exposing their flanks. It was a gamble no other Roman general would have dared to take. The Persian commander mocked the strange ditches, calling Belisarius a coward. Then he ordered the attack. The cataphracts charged, a wave of steel and fury, and they ran straight into Belisarius's trap. Their momentum was broken, their formation shattered. Suddenly, the most feared cavalry in the world were a confused, struggling mass. From the flanks, Belisarius unleashed his own cavalry and a storm of arrows. The result was a slaughter. The Persians broke and fled, leaving thousands of their best soldiers dead on the field. Belisarius, the underdog, had achieved the impossible. His name was now known across the empire. He returned to Constantinople a hero. But a new crisis was brewing, one far more dangerous than any foreign army. The city was a powder keg, divided by fanatical chariot-racing factions, the Blues and the Greens. Think of them as the most violent sports hooligans in history, but with immense political power. Justinian favored the Blues, which angered the Greens. After a bungled execution, the two factions did the unthinkable. They united against the emperor. The city exploded in rage. They called it the Nika riot. For 5 days, Constantinople burned. The mob torched landmarks, murdered officials, and even crowned a new emperor. Justinian was trapped in his palace, his authority gone. His advisors told him to flee, to gather his treasure and escape by sea. History balanced on a knife's edge. If Justinian fled, his reign was over. His dream of a restored Rome would die in the flames. And he was about to do it. He was ready to run. But then one person refused. Not a general, not a nobleman, but Justinian's wife, the Empress Theodora. A former actress and courtesan, she had more steel in her spine than all of them combined. She stood before the council and gave one of the most famous speeches in history. She told them they could flee if they wanted, but she was staying. Royalty, she said, is a fine burial shroud. Her words shamed them into action. Justinian, emboldened, turned to the one man he knew could handle the impossible, Belisarius. The plan was brutal and simple. Belisarius and his troops slipped out of the palace and sealed the exits of the hippodrome, where tens of thousands of rioters were gathered. They trapped them. Then they moved in. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The soldiers, loyal to their general, cut down everyone inside. By the end of the day, an estimated 30,000 people were dead. The Nika riot was over. The rebellion was drowned in blood. Justinian's throne was safe, and Belisarius was the man who had saved it. Twice now, he had rescued the empire from the brink. With the home front secure, Justinian turned his eyes westward. First on the list, the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. A century earlier, the Vandals had conquered this vital Roman province, the breadbasket of the empire. They were pirates and heretics, and their king, Gelimer, had just overthrown the pro-Roman monarch. It was the perfect excuse for an invasion, but it was a massive risk. A previous Roman expedition had been annihilated. The Vandals had a powerful navy. The mission was given, of course, to Belisarius. He was given a tiny army, just 15,000 men, to cross the sea and defeat an entire kingdom. The odds were, as usual, against him. But Belisarius had a key advantage: discipline. His army was professional and loyal. The Vandal army was complacent and overconfident. Through a stroke of luck, the Vandal navy and a large part of their army were away dealing with a rebellion in Sardinia. Belisarius landed unopposed. He enforced strict discipline, paying for all supplies and treating the locals with respect. To the Roman African population, he wasn't a conqueror, he was a liberator. The Vandal king, Gelimer, rushed back to face him. He devised a clever, complex plan to ambush Belisarius at a narrow pass 10 miles from the capital, Carthage. He would attack from the front, the left, and the rear simultaneously. It should have worked. It should have destroyed the Roman army. But the attack was horribly uncoordinated. Belisarius's vanguard blunted one attack, his rear guard another. The main Vandal force struck too early, and when Gelimer discovered his brother had been killed in the fighting, he lost his nerve, stopping to mourn him on the battlefield. This single moment of hesitation cost him everything. Belisarius seized the opportunity. He rallied his troops and smashed the disordered Vandal army. Gelimer fled into the desert. The road to Carthage was open. Belisarius marched into the ancient city without a fight. In one of history's great ironic moments, he sat down in the royal palace and ate the very meal that had been prepared for Gelimer's victory feast. In a matter of weeks, he had broken the back of a kingdom that had defied Rome for a century. But it wasn't over. Gelimer was still out there, gathering a new army. The final confrontation came at Tricamarum. This time, there was no clever ambush. It was a straight fight, and in a straight fight, the disciplined Romans were far superior to the Vandal horde. The battle was another decisive victory for Belisarius. The Vandal army disintegrated. Gelimer fled to the mountains, where he was eventually captured. The Vandal kingdom was no more. North Africa was Roman once again. The entire campaign had taken less than a year. Belisarius returned to Constantinople and was granted a triumph, the ancient Roman celebration of a victorious general. He was the first man not of the imperial family to receive one in over 500 years. He paraded the vast Vandal treasure and the captive King Gelimer through the streets. He was at the absolute peak of his fame, the most popular man in the empire. And that was a problem. In the paranoid halls of the imperial palace, a hero's popularity is just another word for a threat. Justinian smiled and praised his general, but the seeds of envy had been planted. Justinian's ambition was not satisfied. The next prize was Italy itself, the heart of the old empire, now ruled by the Ostrogoths. Using the murder of a pro-Roman queen as a pretext, he declared war, and once again he sent Belisarius. But this was not Africa. The Goths were not the Vandals. They were a unified, battle-hardened people who had lived in Italy for generations. They would not be defeated in a single campaign. This would be a long, brutal, and bloody war that would drag on for nearly 2 decades and bleed the empire dry. Belisarius began by invading Sicily, then crossed into mainland Italy. He marched north, taking Naples in a bloody assault. Then, in 536 AD, he did something incredibly audacious. With a force of only 5,000 men, he marched on Rome itself. The Gothic garrison, intimidated by his reputation, fled without a fight. Belisarius, the general from the Greek-speaking East, had entered the Eternal City, the home of the Caesars. For a moment, it seemed like Justinian's dream was within reach, but he hadn't taken Rome. He had just walked into the world's largest trap. The Goths were furious at losing their capital. They regrouped under their new king, Witigis, and marched on Rome with a massive army, some say as many as 150,000 strong. They surrounded the city, cut the ancient aqueducts that supplied its water, and settled in for a siege. Inside, Belisarius had only his 5,000 soldiers to defend a city with a 12-mile wall. What followed was one of the most remarkable sieges in history. For over a year, Belisarius and his tiny force held out against impossible odds. He was a whirlwind of energy, leading counterattacks, shoring up defenses, and inventing clever new devices to fight off the Goths. The Goths were so impressed by his genius and courage that they made him an incredible offer. They would surrender, end the war, and declare him the new emperor of the West. This was the ultimate temptation, the power to restore the Western Empire in his own name. Many generals would have seized the chance, but Belisarius's defining trait was not his genius, but his loyalty. He served Justinian. He refused the crown. He pretended to accept their offer only as a ruse to get them to open the gates of their capital, Ravenna. It worked. He captured their king and ended the first phase of the war, but his loyalty was about to be repaid with poison. When news of the Goths' offer reached Constantinople, Justinian's rivals at court saw their chance. They twisted the story, painting Belisarius not as loyal, but as a potential usurper who had considered the crown. They fed Justinian's deepest fear, that his brilliant general was becoming more popular and powerful than the emperor himself. Justinian, who owed his throne to this man, began to believe them. The trust was broken. He recalled Belisarius from Italy, denied him a second triumph, and sent him to fight the Persians again, far from the center of power. Without Belisarius, the Roman position in Italy collapsed. The Goths rallied under a brilliant new king, Totila, who quickly undid all of Belisarius's hard-won gains. The generals Justinian sent to replace him were useless, more interested in enriching themselves than in fighting. The war dragged on, Italy was devastated, and the imperial treasury was drained. Justinian had let his paranoia sabotage his own grand project. Finally, with the situation desperate, he had no choice. He had to send for the one man who could fix it. He had to send for Belisarius again. But the Belisarius who returned to Italy was not the same man. He was sent with no money and barely any troops. Justinian was still suspicious, deliberately hamstringing his own best general. Belisarius was forced to wage a guerrilla war, unable to face Totila in open battle. He performed miracles with what little he had, but it was a losing effort. He was a master strategist, forced to be a mere raider. It was a humiliating shadow of his former campaigns. After 5 years of this thankless struggle, he was recalled again, his reputation tarnished. The final insult came when Justinian gave the command in Italy to Belisarius's rival, the eunuch Narses, and he gave Narses everything he had denied Belisarius: a massive army, full funding, and complete authority. With these overwhelming resources, Narses finally defeated the Goths and ended the war. The victory that should have been Belisarius's was given to another man, proving that Justinian's failure was one of will, not of means. Belisarius, the man who had conquered 2 kingdoms and saved the throne, was forced into retirement. But history had one last role for him to play. In 559, when Belisarius was in his late 50s, a horde of barbarians crossed the frozen Danube and raided to the very walls of Constantinople. The regular army was in disarray, the city was defenseless. In the panic, Justinian remembered his old general. He called Belisarius out of retirement. With no army to command, the old warrior scraped together a few hundred of his veteran bodyguards and a militia of local farmers. It was a pathetic force to face a barbarian horde. And he won. Using the same brilliant mind that had triumphed at Dara 30 years earlier, he laid a clever ambush. He used the terrain to his advantage and tricked the invaders into thinking his small militia was a much larger army. He routed the horde and saved the capital one last time. The people of Constantinople celebrated him as their savior. And for Justinian, this was the final, unforgivable sin. Belisarius was popular again. He was a hero again, and the emperor could not tolerate it. A few years later, Belisarius was implicated in a plot against Justinian. The evidence was flimsy, the accusations almost certainly false, but it was the excuse the emperor needed. The old general was publicly disgraced, his wealth was confiscated, and he was placed under house arrest. Though Justinian eventually pardoned him, his spirit was broken. This final act of betrayal gave rise to a powerful legend that persisted for centuries. The story of Belisarius being blinded by the emperor and forced to beg on the streets, crying out, "Give a coin to Belisarius, whom fortune raised and envy has cast down."
While the story of the blind beggar is probably just a story, the truth is almost worse. He wasn't just betrayed, he was systematically erased. In the official histories of Justinian's reign, his monumental achievements are downplayed. His victories are credited to the emperor's divine guidance. His genius is ignored. His loyalty is forgotten. He was made a footnote in the story he should have dominated. only through the writings of his personal secretary, Procopius, who wrote a scathing, secret history exposing the dark side of the imperial court, do we get a clearer picture of the truth.
Belisarius died in 565, just a few months before Justinian. He left behind a legacy of impossible victories and unshakable loyalty. He conquered Africa and Italy. He saved his emperor from mobs and invaders. He fought outnumbered and underfunded from the deserts of Persia to the fields of Italy. He possessed the virtues of the old Roman Republic: duty, honor, and service to the state. But he lived in an age of absolute autocracy, where those virtues were seen not as assets, but as threats. He was, in many ways, the last true Roman, living in an empire that no longer had a place for men like him. And what of Justinian's grand dream? It died with him. The empire was bankrupted by the endless wars. A devastating plague killed millions, weakening it from within. The territories Belisarius had fought so hard to reclaim were lost within a generation. The reconquest was a glorious, bloody, and ultimately unsustainable dream. A dream built on the genius of one man and sabotaged by the paranoia of another. The story of Belisarius is a timeless warning about the nature of power and the terrible price of envy. It shows that even the greatest hero is not safe from the insecurity of the men he serves.
History is full of these forgotten figures, heroes whose stories have been buried by time or politics. If you want to uncover more of the tales they never taught you in school, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. But what do you think? Was Justinian a visionary emperor whose paranoia was a tragic flaw? Or was he a tyrant who couldn't stand to be outshone by a better man? Let us know in the comments below.